am a member of the Common Reading Committee as well as an instructor with the English and Writing and Rhetoric departments. And I've been asked here to sit and have a conversation with Cedric. And at some point, we're going to turn the spotlight on all of you, and we ask that you come up and ask questions. I also want to say hello to our Providence campus. We know that they're watching us up in Providence tonight. And so we ask that when you ask questions, if you come down to this microphone, so that way the folks in Providence can see you, okay? So, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Cedric.
All right, thank you for having me.
Yeah. I want to start out, you've been here now for a few hours.
Yes.
He flew in, and now he's here, and we've had a session at 4, and we've had dinner together. And I had asked you in the first session about your remembrance of being a freshman, your first month at school, being here now for a few hours on a campus again, being around so many freshmen. Do you have anything that is coming back to you about that first month of nerves and excitement?
Well, just the anxiety of, what would be next, what to expect, will I be accepted among my peers? You know, will people think I'm smart? Will people think I'm dumb? Will people respect me? Will people think or have preconceived notions because I'm tall and I'm black? Will they think I'm just here on a basketball scholarship? Those kinds of questions came to mind because you just don't know what to expect. You don't know how people will perceive you without having, in some instances, spoken to you, or or having, not even having engaged you. You just have that anxiety, but then there's an excitement that comes with it as well. You transitioned and you've moved on from your high school experience, and really this is like this stage. College becomes the stage in which you come into your own and become a real adult and become independent. At least that was the experience for me. And there's that excitement that comes with being on your own and not having nagging parents around. Mm-hmm.
Hello. What kind of advice or experience can you offer to freshman students in terms of their first semester? Because the first semester is different than any other semester.
Mm-hmm.
You really are, in a way, it's a totally new experience that will never happen again.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you think is crucial in these first few months as you're adjusting to being here?
Well, one of the ways that I adjusted, my mom sort of taught me this going along, and it became applicable to experiences that I had even pre-college. It was that sort of notion, fake it till you make it. And like, for example, she said, when you're out eating, and it's a formal setting and you don't know which fork to choose, you wait and you watching what everyone else is doing, and then you sort of follow suit. If someone says something that's funny and they mention a concept or the name of a person that you don't know, and in the context of it you're supposed to laugh, then laugh, but then after that run to the library and find out what they were talking about. So just knowing that when you get to college, there are going to be people who are smarter than you. There are going to be people who, it appears that, they're better in the sense that they are more prepared. There are going to be instances where you just feel like you don't fit in, you're out of your element. Those are, I would say, normal feelings. Normal feelings, and you should never take that as being indicative of you not being worthy of being here. And I had to learn that at Brown, and I had to learn to reach out of my comfort zone and to learn to engage people that I wouldn't ordinarily engaged, or wouldn't even have been exposed to back in DC. My belief is that our blessings come in different packages. You just never know who will be a blessing to you, and sometimes the very person that we perceive as someone we don't need is the very person who may hold the blessing to really help you along your way. So, I've learned essentially to be more open-minded, and open to change and open to, different people.
As you made the transition from Ballou High School to Brown University, in Hope in the Unseen, Ron Susskind spoke specifically about how you felt that you were between two worlds.
Yes.
And I see, and even that transition space of MIT going to the summer program is even a transition without that. Can you talk about some of the things in the transition itself that made you feel like you were straddling two worlds?
Oh, absolutely. I grew up in predominantly black communities. I attended predominantly black schools, so that was my culture, my experience. And, essentially, and it really falls back on something that Justice Thomas said to me when I met with him. And he said, once you leave, you're not always welcome back. And, you know, I didn't quite I didn't know what he meant at that time, but it became more of a reality. You know, I was talking with some friends about what it means to grow, and I was watching Oprah, an old interview that she had done with Fantasia, and she was talking about how she had grown but had not changed. And I thought about it, I'm like, how can you grow and not change? It's like, to grow is to change. But, for the most part, there are going to be people who don't understand the change and not understand it in such a way that you feel that you've abandoned who you are and where you came from. And so essentially, that is some of what I experienced once I went back after Brown. But then in the same vein, you're caught because it's like you're going off to this new, unfamiliar place where you don't even know if the people there are going to accept you. So it's almost like, someone asked me, I was just in Cleveland, and they were asking me about quitting. Had I ever thought about quitting? Well, yeah, I had thought about it, but when I looked back and saw what I would have had to go back to versus where I was at that time, even though it was a difficult time, it really didn't make sense to go back because I wouldn't have been better off to go backwards. And, but just, it's not that you've changed in terms of, I guess for me, I never lost my groundedness. I never lost a sense of humility and a sense that, of wanting to give back. And I think, for me, it was difficult when I went back to DC trying to prove, no, I hadn't changed in that regard. But there are some areas that I have changed, like, for example, things that might be considered minor, I had changed my diet. I went from growing up and eating every part of the pig to being a vegetarian, which I've been for 14 years now. And, that was something that came when I got to Brown, shortly thereafter. And people couldn't quite understand that. You done got up there with all those white folk and you let them change you, was their response. But I consciously made that decision, based on some realities that I had seen. I had seen the realities of high blood pressure and diabetes. And, so, going off to college, makes you more conscious and more aware of some things that perhaps you didn't think about before. And sometimes as your level of consciousness becomes more apparent in the things that you do, the way you conduct yourself, the things you do, some people are not going to understand. Just like, there are people from high school, some of whom I'm still in contact with, and we share a great relationship. And then there are others whom, I don't really speak with them because we've sort of drifted apart by way of different experiences. Some chose to stay back in DC and they sort of stayed in the bubble of that one community where we were raised and never really expanded their horizons to the point where, they had a perspective beyond that community. And so it separated us in a lot of ways. Here I was growing, learning new perspectives in the world, and it was just a mismatch after a while. We just shared lesser and lesser in common.
So one of the things that I'm hearing is that when you left at first, it can be difficult for the first year students to go home again.
Mhm.
But I know because I've talked to you before. But can you share with our first year students what you're doing today? Because I think that would be an interesting sort of then coda to that idea of you can't go home again. because you did go home again.
I did go home again. Again, I never lost a sense of groundedness, and in fact, one of my prayers to God was, no matter how successful I am in the world, bless me to stay humble and to stay grounded, because just as quickly as you bless with success, it can be taken away at any given moment. Nothing is promised to us, and so I graduated from Brown in 1999. I graduated with a degree in education, and wasn't sure what I really wanted to do. I knew that somehow I wanted to help other people. I wanted to help people who were, considered underprivileged and, lacked certain resources. And, toward the end of my senior year, I was bombarded with a number of opportunities to go work on Wall Street or to, do some management consulting. And, it was very tempting to follow that path, because it goes back to the question of, why did I come to college in the first place? And some people's realities of, in terms of why they came to college in the first place, it varies, because for some it's a vehicle for economic freedom, not having to struggle the way your parents struggled, and then also being able to go back and help your family. And so for me, that was those were enticing opportunities for me. And knowing that I could, make a lot of money at a young age and help my family, and then, have that Q45 at the time, and, get that fat house, and, but, as I did community service while I was here in Providence, and, started working with young people, and observing a lot of the inequities that I saw in the public school system, and how, the ethnic minority males, particularly Black and Hispanic males, were being overrepresented in special education classes. That sort of moved me to anger, and it made my focus in school shift from the sciences to education. So after I graduated from Brown, I stayed in Providence for the summer, worked at the Salvation Army, um, decided that I needed to go back home. And I went on, I did some work in technology, and by that time, Hope and the Unseen had come out, and we were touring and traveling for the book, and I was meeting so many young people and families, and it really, the more and more I engaged and interacted with them, I realized my calling was really to work with people and help people. And so I knew I was going to go back to grad school at some point, so I started looking at counseling programs. And Harvard Graduate School of Education has this wonderful program called the Risk and Prevention Program, which is like a school-based psychological counseling program um, for students who were interested in working with underprivileged populations. And so I got accepted into that. And interestingly, I got my acceptance letter to Harvard the day before I got my pink slip from the job I had, because they were downsizing. So I kind of knew that I was on the right path with that, because I didn't have a plan. So, so I interned, interestingly, before I went on to Harvard, I interned at the National Education Association, which is in DC. I did that. And I went on to Harvard and had a wonderful experience, great learning experience. And then immediately the following year, because it was just a year master's program, I went on to the University of Michigan, and in '03, I got my master's degree in clinical social work. Went back to DC, wanted to give back, so I got involved in social work, and worked in child welfare, worked with abused and neglected children and families, and did some adoption social work as well. I did that for about 4 years, close to 4 years, and then in '08, I got an appointment. The chairman of the DC City Council reached out to me, and he informed me of this new office that he wanted to create, which dealt with anything related to youth, particularly programming that would help develop youth to be young emerging leaders, called the Office of Youth Programs. And within that office, one of the things that we've been blessed to put out there is this marvelous internship program that's patterned after the Congressional Page program, where we teach young people the functions of the council and how to engage their government at a young age. And, teaching them that lesson and that skill of advocacy early on, which could be transferable within any career, whether you go into politics or not. And, and the program has really morphed and emerged into this sort of more comprehensive program where we are working with them on some future planning, college and career planning, activities and, teaching them a lot of cool things that will really help them as they move forward into their college experiences. And so I'm just really excited about the work we're doing and, really hope to continue along the same path of working with young people, even if, as we move forward, my position changes because we've had a different, we're going to have a change in power in the next few months with our new mayor. So,
It's interesting to me because you were appointed as a director of youth services, Office of Youth Services. And one of the things that I'm struck by in Hope in the Unseen is the way in which you have mentors and you have a benefactor at Brown. And in some way, the change in your major actually comes from not just an interest in reaching out, but because people somehow reached out to you.
absolutely.
And so I know that a lot of I'm sure that the first years would love to hear about what you think they need to look for when they're looking for a mentor, or or how to notice when somebody is actually attempting maybe to mentor you, and maybe you don't quite know what that means yet.
Right.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned to the other group earlier, mentoring, it doesn't always have to be something that's long term. It doesn't have to be someone who knew you when you were younger, or it could be someone you could be meeting in passing in an airport, or just in passing in general, and they might pass on some wonderful words of wisdom to you that help you go on to the next thing in life and to really, work through some things. And, for me, my mom has always been, my main mentor. She really was one of those women that, she's just a woman of wisdom, great woman of God, woman of wisdom. Um, she she addressed me in a non-judgmental way. She didn't judge me. She wasn't quick to yell and to get excited if I said something that was alarming, but instead she was a listener. She was someone who, or is someone, I should say, who validated what I said, what I would say. But in the same vein, she didn't agree with everything I said. And even now, I wouldn't want to surround myself with people who are always agreeable with what I say. You don't want those kinds of friends that say yes to everything, but you want friends and mentors around you who are going to tell you the truth, and you know that it's coming from a genuine place of care, and that they have your best interests at heart, and that they know you in a lot of ways, can complete your sentences, and would never really steer you wrong. And that's what the mentors have done for me. And Dr. Korb, who was my benefactor while I was at Brown, is a classic example of, how one can mentor even from a distance. I may not be in the same place with you at the same time, but I may send you a note here or there of encouragement. I may send you resources that you don't have. And resources with Dr. Korb wasn't even just the money, the check that I would get every month, but he connected me with Helene Shupak, who was my tutor at Brown. And she actually helped me improve my writing skills as well, as the demand for good writing at Brown. So.
When earlier in the last session, you talked a little bit about developing the interns that you have their critical thinking skills. And one of the things that you talked about was how important writing was. And as an English instructor, that always thrills me when anybody wants to talk about writing in that way. But can you talk about why you think that a student can develop critical thinking skills through their writing? Why that's important? Because you also talked about journaling in the last.
I did. What's interesting is that when I got to Harvard, I was asked the question earlier, what was my best educational experiences of the three schools that I attended, and I would say that it was Brown University. Number one, because it was Providence, and I really love Providence, Rhode Island. I love Rhode Island. It's a great state. I love the people, beautiful people. Um, and, but what Brown did for me was that it really laid the foundation. A lot of what I didn't get in high school that I should have gotten, I got at Brown. Um, you know, and I am grateful to Brown for that writing across the curriculum is what they had. So even in a math course, you had to write papers, which was quite interesting. And we did projects. Yeah, you had to write. And, I was a math person, so I thought for sure I could escape that in my math classes. But that didn't quite work out that way. And, but it challenged me, it challenged me from all fronts to be a better writer. But what's important, what I learned as I transitioned to Harvard, first thing I learned at Brown, I should say, going back, I learned to write from within. I learned to write about what I saw through the lens, of my experiences. And then as I moved on to Harvard, and you get to that graduate level of writing, and you analyzing theories and looking at various practices and best practices, what it taught me to do was to elevate, my thinking to thinking in a broader sense beyond myself and being unselfish in that regard, and looking at, ways to even theorize what I have observed in a way that it will benefit others. And so, you know, that's why writing is so important, that you're able to get out those emotions that you're feeling, even if it comes out in a way that wouldn't be standard English, or, would initially not be an A English paper. But for the most part, getting it out there to the point where you're in touch with yourself, but then connecting with those folk who can help you communicate it in a way that is understandable, respected among different circles, and not just pushed to the side as some gibberish. And that's essentially what I learned, with writing. It's very, very important to be able to also think critically and not settle for what you get in a textbook, you know. And, one of the students, one of my colleagues at Harvard once said, it's not about having all the answers. College is not about being the smartest in terms of having all the answers. It's about answering or asking smart questions. And so, essentially, it's about asking the questions and not just settling for what you see on television, or settling for what you read in the newspaper, or, settle for just anything, but ask when, where, why, when, how, who done it, And, and interestingly, you'll find that in some cases, it ain't the truth. It ain't the truth. And so that's, inquiry is the key to uncovering the truth. And that's so very important. And that's where writing can also come into play.
We're talking about writing, but one of the other things that you had mentioned before was that, as important as academics were, that in some ways the social aspect of college was just as important, if not more important. And that somehow, without acknowledging that aspect, that no matter how smart you were, no matter how many A's you received, it didn't mean that you could necessarily bridge that gap. Can you talk about why you think that being social, being out, and learning how to live with each other is really important?
Having good social graces is so very important. And even in the program that I'm running in DC, I try to teach the young people early on the importance of, having just certain social graces, from something as basic as shaking another person's hand, looking them in the eyes, listening closely to what they're saying, and, being able to, just engage them, even if it's just small talk, but being able to engage them in a way where they're interested in even talking back to you, and then also embracing those things which are unfamiliar to us. And, and that's a part of, for me, my learning was, in terms of the social aspect of college, embracing that which is different. Because as I said earlier, your blessing can come in a different package than what you would think it would come in. And so, for me, one of my blessings at Brown was Aid Dorn, a white kid from Chicago who was clearly influenced by Black culture. And I was so taken by the fact that, here's this white kid who was listening to Biggie Smalls, And, I thought for sure, this must be a joke, because I just, there's no way this kid knows Biggie Smalls. So, and that's where we connected. And it went from there. And that became a model for me of how to develop healthy, strong relationships. You work, you start, your starting point should always be what you share in common, not what is different between the two of us. However, there's no way in some instances you can't, you at least won't have the differences in mind. Because the reality is, for example, I had to, at Brown, realize, I'm a black man. I'm a black young man in this predominantly white institution. And, as much as, I'm a believer in, building on what we share in common, there are certain realities you cannot escape. We do not live in a colorblind society. So essentially, my mom prepared me for this. No matter where you go, even if you go to a predominantly black school, she would say, the fact is, you're going to be, the first thing people are going to see is you're a black man. You're a black man in American society. And in some circles, you're going to be treated favorably, and then in others, you won't be treated as favorably. And there are going to be certain assumptions that are made, and there are going to be certain things that people think of you, just by virtue of where you come from and what you look like. They might not even have a conversation with you, which can be dangerous, and which, can lead to prejudice, um, which is unhealthy for any community. So I say, reach out of your comfort zone, even beyond what you think you know about a person. And, that was the key to my success at Brown on the social side. And that helped me academically, because those were the same people who were able to help me in some academic work as well. Because, even beyond the classroom, your teachers are not the only ones who facilitate the learning. But as you engage in dialogue, the learning becomes mutual. It's not one-sided, you know. And so, that's why it's very important to talk to different people, because they can give you varying perspectives that enhance your learning.
Could you address this idea that some people, some critics, when they read the novel, not the novel, some critics, when they read Hope in the Unseen, they suggest that you're an example of an American success story that then sort of hides perhaps the truth of what it's like in an inner city, or what it's like for minority populations, and what it means to actually reach over certain lines. That they'll say this isn't typical, but it's put forth as, well, if Cedric can do it, anybody can do it. Can you address some of those issues about, I mean, what you just said about class? We're not class and race. We're not a colorblind society. We're not a classless society.
Mm-hmm. I'll be the first to say I'm not any sort of an anomaly. I believe that there are other people who are just as successful as I am. In some instances, have struggled with some adverse situations that were just as, if not more profoundly adverse than my own. I can't help the fact that I was chosen for this book. And so, if anything, this is just an example, of some of what people experience in the inner city. And, I always say, instead of criticizing that, this, first of all, is not an adversity contest. It's not about who has gone through the most stuff. But if anything, let us celebrate that someone actually made it out, and let this be, a wake-up call that there are others who have done the same thing and have excelled in our society. But interestingly, that sort of criticism has come from within the Black community more so than outside of that.
In what way?
In what way? Because, oftentimes, again, people engage in that sort of adversity contest type attitude. I went through more than that, you're not so great, or they'll assume, well, I already know that story. I've seen that too many times, but it's not about that, you know. And, I would never minimize another person's experience. But if, anytime I see another young person or anyone that's successful, that's overcome obstacles in life and, gone on to do great things, I'm more inclined to celebrate with them as opposed to hate on them, essentially, because, hating on them isn't doing any good in the world anyway. So.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for saying that. I have a question for you because someone in our last session actually asked about how you were chosen for the book, and you talked a little bit about the ways in which your school, in some ways, tried to hide you from Ron Susskind. So can you talk? I mean, you're talking about that very thing about they tried to hide you, but your light just wasn't going to be hidden under a
A
bushel, as
bush.
they
That's
say.
right. That's right. That's would not be hidden under a bushel. The thing is, I was what made me a target at Ballou High School was that I was very I expressed a great deal of pride in my academic success, you know, um, in such a way, and just really excited about the future and what the future held for me. And, I just was, it was just like this beaming light, that was upon me. And it was like I wanted to shout it from the mountaintops, but not knowing that, in a lot of ways, that sort of pricked against the despair of some of my classmates, who once upon a time were just as successful academically and got to high school, fell by the wayside, gave in to peer pressures, became underachieving students. And for that reason, I was picked on. There were people who thought I was trying to be white and thought I was better, and it was never like that. But what was interesting was that Ron, I met him in 1993. I was a junior. I was 16. That was 17 years ago. Um, I'm old. So, yeah. um, but, met him 17 years ago, came over to Ballou, wanted to do a story about honor students. He was a Wall Street Journal reporter, wanted to do a story about honor students, how they're able to really keep it together in a school like Ballou, which was known for being very violent and having very low academic standards. And he was given a listing of all the honor students, except my name wasn't on it. And he was given a list of about 70 students out of 1,300. And it was really interesting because my theory, I told the audience earlier, my theory was that they didn't want me to really tell the truth of the things that I saw at the school. Um, so one day Ron was in the office. I didn't know he was even there. And I came in to the office to debate a grade that I had gotten in computer science class. I'll tell anyone at that time, I did not know of any other letter of the alphabet that should be on a report card other than an A. And so I went in and there was a B on the report card this one time, B plus actually. And I went in and I didn't like the B plus on there. And so I said, this grade has to be changed. And so, I left the office. Ron says I stormed out. And Ron asked the principal who I was. And the principal told him who I was. He said, but stay away from him. He's nothing but trouble. Because he's an honor student, but he's too proud. And, the notion of being too proud of success, it's an interesting concept that I just can't bring myself to believe, or to accept, that one could ever be too proud of doing well academically, especially as a young person in high school. Could never bring myself to understand that. But anyway, Ron went and found me, and it went from there. Initially there were some barriers, because of my own discretions and inhibitions, about, having this outsider, this short white Jewish guy from Delaware, write about me, this black kid from the inner city. What would you do with the information I give you? Would you exploit me? Would you take that information and, distort the true reality of my life's experience? And but over time, as Ron and I developed a relationship, I saw that he really had my best interest. And, over time, my mom grew to, accept him and to trust him a little bit to, do the story. And it went from there.
Well, it's interesting to me because one of the things that I think is different, and maybe our first year students don't understand this, but when Ron first saw you and realized that not only weren't you trouble, but you were a story that was worth telling, there was no reality TV. So I think it's important to remember, too, that when you were asking for a sense of privacy and a sense of normalcy, that you're asking for something different maybe than what we expect from our reality TV today, which was you were saying, please respect me, and I'm not looking for fame, but I'm willing to share my story with people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that that's really important. I have a feeling that some of you might have questions out here. Am I right about this? Does anybody want to get up and come on down to the mic and ask a question? Yeah, come on down. Is Dylan around too?
Hi.
Hello.
I have two questions actually. What kind of influence do you hope that your book, your story, impact us on? And what is your ultimate message or advice that you hope to give us as
Yeah.
freshmen?
Yeah, I
Thank
can
you.
answer that all in one. Um, I would hope that as anyone, not just the students here, but as anyone picks up the book and reads it, that you look beyond race, you look beyond color, because even though the story is about a black kid growing up in Washington, D.C., it really has more to do with what we share, in terms of all humanity. There are just some basic feelings and emotions and even factors that are projected in the book about my life that I believe we all share in common. You know, uh, there are many of us who can attest to having a strong mother. Um, some of us can relate to the idea of growing up in a religious household or being heavily involved in church. You know, um, and I would guess that the freshmen who are here and those who once upon a time were even freshmen, and even some of us who are older and have been out of school for over 10 years, can really look back and relate to, some of the anxieties and the fears that came with going to college for the very first time and being a freshman. So I would hope that, those who read the book are able to pretty much infuse themselves in the story in such a way that they can connect and find the parallels between their own lives and what is projected in the book. And I think that once people are able to do that, they'll see that we have a lot of things in common that really transcend race.
I have a follow-up question for that. When you went to MIT,
Yes.
you met suburban minority students that had been better prepared than you had. Can you talk, was that a surprise to you? Was it shocking? Did it help you in any way to recognize the challenges that you would face once you went on to college?
Was very shocking for me, very much a culture shock for me. And as I mentioned earlier, I had given the example of the good times versus the Huxtable experience. You know, growing up in a low income working class community, predominantly black. For me, I was more able to relate to the good times experience. Okay, you know, and the thinking with that was, you weren't really black unless you had gone through something or unless you had struggled. That was my thinking because that's all I knew. That's all I saw at the time as a young person. But this whole notion of being like the Huxtables and having a father who's a doctor and a mother who's a lawyer, and and your siblings are going to Ivy League schools and you live in this great brownstone in Brooklyn, and the idea of that was something actually, to put it out there, it was something that was more in my community associated with being white. you know and so for me, to encounter, not even just encounter people eating that brown, um, to encounter other ethnic minorities, particularly black folk who, come from those well-to-do sort of families and households, was a culture shock because I had never been really exposed to that. That was not a reality that, of mine. And And I think what was most disturbing is that the very people who, who were the well-to-do blacks, had all of these great advantages and things going on for themselves, were trying in their power to do everything to prove their blackness, so to speak, by dressing and behaving like those they would typically associate with the type of community in which I grew up. Yeah. So it was just interesting, that dynamic. And it's just, for me, it was like, okay, well, why are you faking the funk? Why can't you be yourself, be who you are? Why are you trying to be something that you're not? If that's not how you were raised, or if that wasn't really your influence, why do you need to project that? And that was a big problem for me, um, you know, especially at Brown. Mm-hmm.
While you were at Brown in your first year, you made certain friendships, and there were other people that you chose to keep a little bit of a distance from. Can you talk about the process through your freshman year of making friends and then leaving certain people behind and moving as you moved through your coursework through the 4 years?
Well, I've always been the type, I don't, even to this day, I don't let everyone into my circle. I'm very selective about who my friends are and who I say is a friend. I think that's so important that you know who your real friends are, because you got some fake friends, and I've learned you can have some fake friends, and a lot of times you don't realize that until you get burned. And but for me at Brown, me coming into that experience as someone, again, black, and I can't stress that enough, because again, as much as I talk about, really building upon what we share in common, again, I had to deal in reality as well. I was black in a predominantly white elite institution. So, I was black. That was part of my identity, or is a part of my identity, and I was apostolic. I grew up in the church. I was schooled on the do's and the don'ts of being a good Christian. And, so there were just certain things I knew not to do and committed not to do. And there were people who did those things, such as they did drugs, they smoked, they did certain things. And I said I wouldn't hang out with them either. And, I have this running joke that for a year, almost a year, I didn't have any friends. And, because I isolated myself, and I really did myself a disservice by closing myself off, in essentially, again, Zay Dorn was my saving grace in that, because he really helped me to see that you can have a belief system and a value system, that's pretty set. But just because you interact with others who may have a different value system doesn't mean that yours has to change. However, what happens oftentimes is, as you interact with different people and learn different perspectives, for me at least, I found that I began to question my own belief system. Why is it that I believe what I believe? Because for so long I grew up believing this is my truth. This is how life is supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do. And this is how I'm supposed to conduct myself in the world. And when you engage others and gain other perspectives, it helps you to really look within and, question those belief systems. And so that's a learning experience in and of itself. And, but through that, I, had developed some good friends, lifelong friends.
You keep bringing something up, and you mentioned it once, but everything that you say suggests that if you want to succeed, not only in school but in life, you must always reach beyond your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what that means to reach beyond your comfort zone? Because I think that that's a valuable concept for all of us to learn, not just the first year students.
Well, there's this expression, I am a tea bag. I will never know my true strength until I'm in hot water. And it's only when we put ourselves out there in some uncomfortable situations where we really grow to learn more about not just the world, but ourselves. That challenges us to pull out things and potential in us that we didn't necessarily know we had. And, it's almost like working out on a regular basis. You start out sore after you do it rigorously, for the first couple weeks. But the more you get practice at doing it and working at something like that, it becomes less painful. It becomes more. It becomes more of something that becomes exciting and good. You realize it's being good for you. Exercising that. Um, you know, that sort of idea of, reaching out of one's comfort zone. And then reaching out of one's comfort zone could even be something as basic as, the courses you choose. You know, looking at things that you wouldn't have ordinarily taken or been exposed to in another setting. I was telling the group at dinner about one course I took at Brown that I'd never heard of. And who would have thought that Prince would name one of his albums after this was, I think it was musicology, but I took a course called ethnomusicology, out of my love for music. And what ethnomusicology helped me to do was to kind of connect music and its influence on society, popular culture, and how it joins people and can really help solve some social problems in the world, and how it has done that historically. And so, it all starts from getting a sense of yourself, knowing what you like, knowing what interests you, um, and sort of building from that.
Can you tell them how many songs you actually now have on?
On my iPod,
Yeah.
about 6,000.
So you
About
really,
6,000.
so you listen to a lot of music.
I can't say I listen to 6,000 songs a day, but I go through a lot of music. And I started my collection, interestingly, at Brown University. So by the time I left Brown, I had 2,000 CDs. BMG Music Service was my best friend. I would order the CDs for $3, and they would send it in the mail. But now, who would have thought you could be able to download it? You push a button. So, yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? Come on down. Get out of your comfort zone. Oh, this is a shy group. Are you all just tired after dinner?
I know I have the itis too, but
Hello, how you doing?
I'm great.
I'm here at URI as a graduate student now, but I'm a product of the Providence Public School System,
Okay.
and I just want to ask you because personally I feel a lot of frustration with the students who do fall through the cracks and don't make it because I know the potential that exists because I'm here and I know that other people can be like me and do this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still feel these frustrations, or do you ever feel the frustrations of students who fall through the cracks and don't even get to make it to this first year of college?
Well, I want to keep those frustrations because if I lose those frustrations, then I'll lose my passion. Why I even got into the business of being in a helping profession, stemmed from being moved to anger. And usually, one of my friends told me, he said, usually what you get angry about the most is usually what you're supposed to be working on fixing. And so, I have the same frustrations, but interestingly, it's not exclusive to Providence. I see it in DC all the time. Um, and it's really sad to see young people who have an immense amount of potential, fall through the cracks. But it helps me to put things in perspective because, when a young person comes to my program, for example, and I see that there are some things that they are deficient or inadequate in terms of writing or whatever it is, my first response is it's not their fault. So first of all, I can't blame them, for what they have not been taught. And, so basically, I have to pick up the pieces with them and help fill the gap as best I can. And, you know, and that's really, that again, that anger, that frustration, keep that and let that be a motivator to fix the problem, because clearly it is impacting you in such a way that, you think about it, it's a frustration. But that's probably what you may need to look at working on and fixing.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hi, my name's Kendall, and I'm a DC public school student, so I've had the experience of going to a DC school.
Which school?
School Without Walls.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Okay, I was at your graduation this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was.
Oh, wow.
Melanie Vincent, you know Melanie
Yeah,
Vincent?
yeah, very good
She
friend.
was in our program.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yep.
So
She's like, okay, moving on. Okay,
So
I have a question. Okay.
it's more of a personal question. Going to DC, living in DC, and I went to one of the better schools in the city. But knowing that we've had a change in, the mayor and all the different change in the education system, and being able to play on different sports teams and have other friends that go to Baloo, do you think there's been a change in the education system, and particularly in DC as well as in Baloo? Do you think it's gotten better, or what's your view?
Worse.
What you really do?
Worse.
And
I
why would you
do.
say that?
I do. Excuse me. I visited Baloo several times, and what's interesting to me is, I believe that when you talk about giving a school resources, I think money is a part of resources, but money isn't always the answer. Resources could be people, it could be, just different things other than money. And, I watched this school, you know, and thank God, through the exposure of the school through the book, you know, um, there are people who've donated computers and have done different things for the school, but it's still, while there's students there who are achieving and doing well, let's not leave that out, that part of it out. But there's still, when I walk into the school, this gross sense of underachievement, kids roaming the hallways instead of being in class, fights still breaking out, not being able to control, the movement in the school. And, and it's just really, for me, in a lot of ways, again, frustrating and disheartening. But again, that strengthens me in my role. And also, when I have students in the program, I see, just from what they produce in the program, is directly proportionate to what they're getting in the public school system, learning wise. And even as I look at private school students and charter school students, you can see the differences, even to one's ability to, like I mentioned before, think critically.
Right.
You know, it's not really there. And it's something that really, it bothers me. And so that strengthens me in terms of knowing that this is what I need to be doing. This is what I need to be working to fix. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a little short, so I don't know if I'm even
Just
picking
pull the
up.
mic down to you.
I don't want to. I'm gonna hit myself with it. Oh, okay.
There you go. It's a mic.
Okay. I'm another product of the Providence Public School System. I'm also a senior in the education program here. I'll be student teaching next semester. I'll be student teaching in some of the Providence public schools. So I've grown up in the inner city, and one of my biggest fears is that when I try to mentor students and when I try to reach them in the inner city schools, that they're not going to take my advice, or that they're going to be like, hey, what does that white girl know? So do you have any helpful advice or hints to help me connect with them better, even though I probably already can?
Well, what would make you think that they wouldn't connect with you because you're white? Are you saying that you will only see black students there or Hispanic students? What are you
No,
thinking?
it's just that was my experience growing up in the public school system. Is I was always looked at as I was the only white kid in my school, and so I was
Okay.
hated it on because of that. So that's why my first instinct is that sort of thing.
Interesting experience I had. I was doing my internship when I was at Harvard. I interned at the Clarence Edwards Middle School in Charleston. And one of my first experiences, because I was doing therapy, one-on-one therapy there, and I did some groups there. And it was interesting, just the context of the community. It had a history, of some racial tensions, and the economic makeup of the community was composed of those who either had money and they lived in nice houses there, or they were on welfare and they lived in projects. They had projects there. And so even with that, I had these preconceived notions of what I would get in a counseling setting with the students that I was going to be counseling. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm going to save all the black kids. I made the huge mistake of thinking just because I was black that I would be able to connect with them and that I already knew their story. I took for granted, some things. I assumed that the black kids were the ones living in the projects, and I assumed that the white kids were the ones living in their houses. And one of my first clients was a young girl. She was real sweet, white, and she lived in the projects. And that sort of blew my mind because a white person living in the projects, I didn't know. Um, so, when you go into those kinds of, situations, it's important to sort of check your own biases. It really starts with you. You know, first of all, why are you here? Why are you doing this? Why did you decide to do this? Being aware of that. Then being aware of your own biases, because we all have some biases, believe it or not. We don't like to acknowledge it because in a lot of ways we think that perhaps it makes us a bad person, but we all have preferences and biases. We have things that make us tick. We have things that we prefer more than others. And so putting that in check, recognizing and acknowledging that. And also, I had to learn to be a listener. It was more about being able to listen and letting them talk, letting the students talk, than it was what I said out of my mouth. Being in a space, creating a space that was, that was comfortable for them, where they felt that they could express their feelings, where, there was genuine care. They got a sense that you really cared about them, in a way that they would eventually, they're not going to tell you their business or tell you things that are really, challenging to them at the very beginning. But over time, as you build a relationship, which is important, you build a relationship, then they'll start to open up. And then even with that, that's as a helping professional, your job is to facilitate the management of emotions and the management of feelings, and to say things to them, not necessarily just by way of advice. Sometimes you can give them nuggets of wisdom, but in the same vein, sometimes it's just sort of pushing them into space to make decisions and guiding them in their decisions. Because it's not about knowing everything. Because you're going to meet folk that you have no clue about what it means to be in that situation, but that doesn't mean you can't reach that kid. And so, it's just important to get to know them, and that's the best advice I can give, because that's what eventually will help me, even to this day. So that's the best advice I could give.
Okay.
To do all those things. Mm-hmm.
We have time for one more question.
Hi. So you mentioned some of the criticism of the book. I don't have criticism of the book, but I do have criticism of the way that some people talk about the book. I read online, some people want to say Cedric Jennings came from this disadvantaged background, and he made it to Brown and to Harvard because he's so hardworking and so smart. Therefore, anyone who's still stuck in that disadvantaged background, anyone who's still in poverty, who's still stuck in a bad social situation, it's just because they're not hardworking enough, just because they're not smart enough. And I know from the things you said here that you don't feel that way. I just worry because it can so easily get wrapped in this narrative, and there's a lot of people who sort of want to say, oh, wherever you are, it's just because of how badly you want it, and things like that. I thought maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
And I think you raise a great point, and again, I don't believe or feel that I'm any sort of an anomaly. I'm not an oddity. There are many other stories like mine, where people, have moved from, profoundly adverse situations and are now very successful because, of the effort and the work that they put out. But essentially, I think that's an abuse of the story to do that, because each person's life is different, because the truth be told, I could live right next door to someone, grow up in the same community, have some of the same advantages or disadvantages, have some of the same opportunities, but something within us, might be different to the point where, my path is totally different from your path. And so, If anything, I would hope that as people read the book, that they make the decision about, whether or not they say, well, if he can do it, I can do it. Not really for anyone else to say to them, but for them to sort of see it for themselves. And that's kind of my approach to it. I don't go around saying, well, because I did it, you should be able to do it. There's no excuse. But then in some situations, though, you do have young people who use adverse situations as a crutch to be underachievers. If anything, in that sort of situation, I would say to the adult or whomever in that young person's life, first of all, you need to challenge that. And I applaud, particularly URI. This is sort of similar of how you're putting the book on display to really show how one can move from struggle to success. And I think that's important for people to do in the lives of young people. Give them examples all the time. Sometimes even share your own story, but not in the context of saying, if I can do it, you can do it, but in the context of saying you're not alone in your struggle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cedric, thank you so much.
We've done it again.
I know we have.
A second time. High five. Wonderful. I really enjoyed this.
I have to say,